Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Alan Endres from Zukaz. It's the 26th of April. This is podcast number 5, and it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Robert Novak, who I've mentioned on many times is the genius behind the new peer-to-peer decentralisation of your Zucoins. I thought I'd have this podcast today as a first with a bit of a questionnaire for Robert, because being inundated with so many questions and questions that are coming through from our Zucoin holders predominantly, a little bit from the Zukaz members, but the early adopters who got in early on the Zucoins, there's two things. One, there's a lot of excitement about when they're going to receive their Zucoins and when they start trading, and also a bit of anxiety about the times and some of the delays that you may see happening in relation to that. So the best way to round that is to get young Robert here to look at some of the questions. I've got some of these questions from the Zucoin holders as well, so it's not just some preset inquiry. But the first thing I would mention in the discussion today is I just want to let some people know the significance in relation to ul.com. We talk about ul.com. I'm not sure whether you've looked and researched it as much as we have and what it means, and that'll put in context the things that you've had to do over the last few months, Robert, which hasn't been very easy. Yeah. So firstly, I just wanted to mention that if anybody takes the time, it's important to establish that UL is one of the world's leading companies which established the objectivity and strength of the UL brand against those corporations or businesses and merchants for their products to give the end users, that's the purchasers of any of those items or users of those items, the absolute security and certainty as to what they're dealing with. Now, one of the facilities, of course, that UL has is this important validation and verification of products or the way in which processes work. And I'm just letting you know that this goes to the overall credibility and market certainty, which is what we've pressed hard for with UL to be effectively, in terms of the Zucoins, the world's first verified, validated crypto that you've ever seen. Now, I know it's frustrating because you've got this large corporation that's giving you some really pushback and getting right into what you want the nitty-gritty, Robert. Yep. But I think if we want that trust and confidence that's not in crypto, that's got to be a big thing we've got to keep pushing for with UL.
Yeah, UL is an enterprise-grade auditing company, so they literally check the bits and pieces that nobody sees to make sure it actually does what it's supposed to do. And we really want to get that because that classes us as an enterprise-grade product. So that's what we're focusing on.
Fantastic.
Obviously means we have to jump through quite a lot of hurdles that most people wouldn't normally have to jump through. A lot of documentation has to be done that normally isn't done. A lot of cross-checking, triple checking has to be done. And that just takes more time. That's all it does. But you end up with a better product at the end of it. So it's upside. It's worth it. Especially in a product where we're dealing with transactions of stuff that's actually worth quite a bit of value. It's a coin, it's a representation of value, so you can't just rush this out and hope that bug fixes will fix it in future. You have to get as close to getting it as right as possible from the beginning. Because it's decentralized, it's going to be hard to stop once it's launched. So we really have to focus on getting the enterprise auditing done properly.
Fantastic. Well, Robert, as you know, UL is a 120-year-old company, so they certainly know the work they're doing. Yep. And I'm going to get to really the big question, the two questions on everybody's lips, of course, is when will we get our coins? And I'm in the same boat. I cannot wait to get the coins as everybody else. So there's a lot of pressure in relation to that. In your discussions over the last few months, and obviously the workload, I'll talk about that in a bit later, yep. But certainly we're looking at sort of some now close to drop-dead times and how you see this and the work back and forward with UL. Yep. What's the latest? So we're all on the same page. Yeah. And when I talk about the latest, we're looking at aspects of when will our coin holders actually have those coins in their hands, in those wallets that you're creating, and how long it'll take to distribute those out. What's the sort of length of time, what you now know with UL, and how close we are to that?
Yeah, we're looking to have the UL auditing done end of May. And that should cover all of the back and forth for any sort of revisions they request. And then from that point, we can release the coins. So that could take anywhere from a few days to a week or two. After that, it would just depend on how many people have Zucoins, because the way the transaction process will work, we'll set up the coins, and then we'll release it out to people based on a list of basically owners of Zucoins who have purchased them over time. So that would just be the last process. So end of May, we're looking to have the UL ordering done, and then from there, it would just take probably a few days.
So Robert, with the obviously it's taken a lot longer than we'd all hope in terms of some of the process from UL's point of view, but
Yeah.
I think people got to understand that you are actually changing the whole dynamic of crypto as we know it. Is that a fair call when you think of the research you've done over the years, what you've achieved, and where UL is actually seeing that this is something that no one's got? Is that?
Yeah, well, it's been quite full on, almost a year now, and even that's not quite a long time. Quite a lot of time. Most of the experts we speak to, they're quite amazed we actually got this done in under a year. And like Bitcoin's been out for 10 years. They've had 10 years to improve it and refine it. And most other cryptocurrencies right now, over 99%, are really just modifications of Ethereum or a token based on Ethereum or a modification of Bitcoin. So they're not actually rethinking the whole process from the beginning, which is what we tried to do. And yeah, to do that under a year is really not a big ask. Like most of the industry experts we speak to from around the world are saying they're surprised we did it that quickly. So this is actually quite not a lot of time. And back in December, we had a version of it not too far from being completed. And that was kind of one of the first approaches we had. And that had a lot of upsides, and it didn't actually need mining either. But the downside was what happens if you went offline, off the network. So we kind of came up with a solution to that. And that solution ended up becoming a whole new version of the product itself. So we kind of had to rework it. We kind of had to restart our ordering with UL from that point. So we've actually created a couple of versions of the system already. But our focus has to be for all the key metrics that Zucoin has to do, which is have no fees, has to be properly decentralized, and we'll have initial like a release period where we can do updates, and then we'll completely disconnect it and have a proper decentralized network. But we need to be able to make sure it's fast, there's no mining needed, and it can verify transactions in a trustful way. And yeah, this is kind of the second version now that we're kind of finalizing, is reaching the end. But that's been the purpose of why it's taken this long, even though really, all things considered, it hasn't been that long.
So you'd say that it's been a good move, A, from a marketing perspective, and obviously the credibility, because we're going to talk about in a minute the impact and power of what these coins has in a commercial sense, but in a software sense, it's the work you're doing with UL has been invaluable, hasn't it?
Yeah, they basically give us what we need to pass enterprise approval. And that's the most important thing. If you pass enterprise, you pretty much passed everything. That passes government regulation, that passes most other types of auditing that are needed for kind of high-end software to really get it out into the systems out there. Yeah.
I mean, it's come at a huge, both in terms of timeline costs as well as financial cost. But for all the Zucoin holders out there, the extra bit of delay that we're talking about, don't be concerned at all. I guess the big question then for you, Robert, is will UL sign off? Are you comfortable that what you've built, which has never been done before, is going to get that high-level, high-standard certification that we talk about, or validation?
Yeah, well, whatever UL comes back with, we're just going to refine it until we meet those marks. So far, it's been pretty good, but the final audit will involve the final library of code, the web app that we use to demo the system, and the documentation, which has to cover pretty much everything. And yeah, we'll get whatever they come back with this final version of the app. We'll just refine to meet those criteria. So it'll just be maybe a bit more back and forth, but that's pretty much it.
So, Robert, we all know that the world has seen a bit of a lift in crypto, particularly Bitcoin, some Ethereum and Litecoin. The market's sort of getting back into that space. The moment you unleash the Zucoins, and we've got that into the market space, the criteria that we've set and what you've achieved will deliver exactly that there is no miners, there is no capacity or overload on the blockchain. That's the norm. If you could just tell us a bit about how that differentiates as an important between what you've done with fragmentation versus an overall block that's been carried around.
Yeah, so the main difference with our system, and it's hinted at the imperative paper, which is the way the transaction is actually are authenticated. It happens at the time of transaction, not a separate process afterwards. And that's kind of one of the most important pieces if people really grasp that. And it's been so hard to kind of build into it because it's deceptively simple, but it's so intricate. And the upside of that is you don't need mining, you don't need fees, you can kind of plug into any existing web system to kind of connect people together. So it runs on a bunch of existing infrastructure that already exists on the web. And it's very easy to just plug and play into third-party systems. So it's actually, got very few downsides that Bitcoin has, and a lot of upsides that we've kind of just spent a lot of time trying to really sort out properly.
Very good. And Robert, I know you and your team have been putting in, there's not much daylight hours left with the hours you're working on this project, but given where UL is, and they've indicated timelines as well, that with the next deliverable of documents and material that you're doing tonight, as I understand, that might fit in with a 10-day type program. It could be that this whole thing will be well before May, early in the last few weeks of May, but you've been conservative, and that's a better way to approach this now. Yes. We
have to be conservative. Yeah, you all mentioned 1 to 2 weeks, about 10 days in the middle. And it just depends on what they come back with. If they advise things or you need to change the final version, we'll just have to do that. But yeah, the final version is gearing up to be given off to UL pretty soon.
So in that material tonight that's going out, can you just elaborate a little bit deeper as to the weight of that information and what that means to save us time, which I'll talk about shortly in terms of integrating with the exchange, which everyone wants to know about, and how that streamlines the API process.
Well, basically, the documentation we're giving to UL will be pretty much the same as what we use for third-party developers to integrate it into other systems. So the documentation covers how it works, why it works, how to integrate it into other kinds of systems. And that'll be what UL uses as well to help audit the system. So we'll be hitting 2 birds with 1 stone with that sort of approach to documentation.
And in terms of now leading into that, the API we talk about and the processes there, obviously the next question on everybody's mind from a Zucoin holder is once they've got the coins, they've got their own peer-to-peer transferability capability. That then lends itself to a very simple management in terms of the wallet and the way in which, if you can explain how a third-party exchange actually won't need or have the necessity to retain your coins and it can be processed without any third-party retention?
Yeah, well, a third party doesn't actually have to hold any of the wallet. They can, which is the way current exchanges work, but there's no need to. All you need to do is connect 2 people up together at each end. The only purpose an exchange would be to kind of, if you wanted to transact with an exchange to change a Zucoin or a cryptocurrency towards a fiat currency. That's the only play that an exchange has. You don't actually need an exchange to transact the coin to another user.
So in an exchange then, the trust element really reverts back to getting paid rather than retention of any coin or data.
Exactly,
which gives you a lot more certainty on not getting hacked. It's a lot harder to hack a billion people
if they haven't got the data. Exactly, yeah.
And Robert, just on that, with everybody carrying around, if they can imagine a fragment of their data or the coin, you don't see any limitation. That could be literally a billion people holding Zucoins.
Yeah, it's actually very tunable. The system we've got, you can actually control how much fragments of the I guess blockchain you'd call it, the historical bit of information everybody has. So it's very tunable. So we can kind of control that before we release it as we keep doing more and more testing. But yeah, it's very small, the data. It's very, very small. It's more like a phone will never fill up with the data.
And that's what lends itself to the speed we talk about. I mean, we can't even measure the speed because, I mean, you know that Bitcoin, it could take 3 hours to process, or seven transactions per second.
Yeah, that's because that's kind of like a series process where everything goes through one stream. Like everything has to go through one queue basically, or one set of queues. Our system doesn't go off a queue like that. It's kind of like a lot of parallel systems in one. So everything can be happening simultaneously while other things happen. You don't have to wait on some kind of master queue or master agreement for things to happen.
And inclusive then, of course, is that it automatically validates itself once it's on that peer-to-peer.
Yeah, once it's done, you can't reverse it. I mean, the way you find the crypto history and the blockchain data, it's going to be very hard to basically reverse. I mean, you're trying to go against a massive elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman hash, which is, it's just, I mean, there's no machine on the planet that can do that.
So for those of us that don't know what he just said then, it was a Diffie involved, but if you could just explain what that means or who that was in terms of encryption?
Yeah, it's actually very simple. It's basically just, the original Diffie-Hellman algorithm was just a power swap. 2 power swaps is all it is. But the point is, the way it creates the key, it's very strong and it's very short. That's what it basically means. And then the way we control the flood of the keys is controlled through the connecting servers, which basically is what you use to complete a transaction.
So this material obviously is crucial to what UL are heavily investigating in order to give us that big tick.
Yeah.
You're not concerned about getting the tick, it's a question of getting to the end result now with what's coming. How are you supplying the information on such volumes and what you've been working on with the team to get to UL? What is that material that they need?
Yep, the material is 3 parts. It will be the crypto libraries, so basically the code that does all the encryption and the transactions and stuff like that. It'll be the web app that's being used to prove the demo. It works that it does. And then the third part will be the documentation and how all of those things work together. And that documentation will double up as the developer documentation for third parties. So that's the 3 pieces, and everything's being communicated with UL through encrypted keys they've provided us. So we encrypt the data, they've got the other set of keys to unlock the data, and we send it to them when we're ready.
Fantastic. Well, Robert, from the coin holder's perspective, obviously timing of getting the coins, so keep coming back to that, but that's the big issue. Also the trading ability, that's fantastic. Yep. But then post that, with the work volume you're doing, that leads us into the excitement coming back to Zukaz. Yep. And just to refresh my memory in terms of how you see the big dollars that are generated in Zukaz from a merchant in voucher redemption and also the hunters in terms of their trading, how simplistic that is in a smart contract to push that money to the Zucoin holders.
Oh, it's really easy. It actually uses the same technique we used to find the historical data on the network. You basically use that same technique to actually find who's owning a certain type of coin at any given time, if you wanted to. Like, there's actually provisions we can put into the system to avoid that. But right now, because it's going to be integrated into Zukaz, you can literally just find who's holding a bunch of coins. You can kind of attach other kinds of values to that. So if you wanted to do like an ownership of real estate, even for like a contract, like a digital contract, you could do that. Just really by using the same function we use to do a transaction to actually find stuff on the network.
So does that mean that because the way in which that operates of the seeking of that from the particular coin holder in the wallet, that you're reverse engineering things like what Google would take when you look through Google in terms of data, that you can stop that capacity? Yeah,
the chances of guessing what someone's coin ID is, which is a long hash, like maybe when quantum computers come out, that will be possible, but right now that's not possible and there's no ETA on quantum computers. So, and even if that does happen, we just release a new version of the wallet that will comply with quantum computers. But there's nothing out there today that can guess a hash that long to guess what a coin is or who owns it.
And even then you could even use the patented technology split lock to sort of start to play with that in terms of breaking that down even further?
Yeah, well right now, the transaction data right now is quite small, so we don't need to break that down. But in future, if you wanted to store other kinds of cloud data, like have a decentralized storage system or decentralized even websites and stuff like that, you just break them down to small pieces, which is kind of what the original split lock system did. You kind of break down small pieces and you shard it across lots of other different people. So you basically just share small pieces everywhere. And then we use the same discovery method as we use the transaction to actually find where those pieces are. And kind of reassemble it into something you can actually use.
So that, in my layman's terms, ladies and gentlemen, that sort of leads into, in the future, space where we're seeing the capacity for each individual for retention of their own photos or videos, or even the way they chat, which would mean that you don't need third-party storage for that. No. Each individual party can keep those fragments. Yeah,
the only part we'd have to consider is really how much each person stores of each other kind of data, but that's completely configurable. Yeah, that's actually something quite straightforward. And it's actually easier to build that into the system than what we're trying to do with the coins. The coins is the hardest milestone to try and pass because you don't really care how many copies of a piece of data is out there. It's just so long as no one else can tamper with it. With the coins, you want to make sure there's only a certain number of coins out there that you can't have copies of it. So coins is actually the hardest matrix of a 2x2 matrix. So if you consider all the combinations of what the system has to do, the coins are the hardest milestone to achieve. So if we achieve that, all these other uses just fall into place straight afterwards.
So we talk about coins in a digitized sense, but it's just data, isn't it?
It's just data.
Yeah. And that data expands out into other forms of data, what you're saying.
Yeah.
And Robert, does that lead then, we've mentioned before, what you can do to secure, if you like, digitized forms of collectibles, obviously real estate, virtual real estate, that's in the same...
Yeah, it'll be the same thing. It's just a piece of data that you can transact. So we'll have a unique hash. And it will basically be in your wallet or someone else's wallet, however you want to transact it, and that will be it.
So Robert, in talking to you may not be aware of this, but in talking to the Zukaz team, which is a whole deployment of another whole IT group, as you're aware, They're talking about some deadlines where they've got the beta versions of the Zukaz apps, that's the Hunter and also the Merchant, in a form in May. Then there's some early adopter testing and a whole launch program coming, which we'll put that out very soon of how big that's going to be in June, and an official launch of that for everybody to get excited, which will be sort of, I think it's the 1st or 4th of July, 2019. Given what you've had to do through the hard yards with UL and how crucial that is to have this massive company, I just want to press the point on that again, ladies and gentlemen. You need to look at the ul.com site. We're talking, just so that you know, a company that has 22 billion products at any point in time marked with the UL brand for the certification and validation across all aspects. That's software as well as hardware. They're in 104 countries of customers, and they've got over 1 billion independent consumers that rely on the outcomes of these validations and these certifications. So for us to be a leading light in crypto, that's a game changer.
Yeah, it's an important milestone to reach with UL, so we have to it's worth it if we can do it. There's no other cryptocurrency that's been audited this way.
So you don't, given the confidence you've had to build, you don't have any issues that you're confident that the UL team's not going to be any smarter than you to sort of come down with the result we want.
It will be interesting to see what they come with, but all the hard stuff, all the final stuff, I'm very certain we've already covered, and anything that come back, I'm pretty sure it'll just be a small tweak here and there. So it should be a quick fix, whatever they come back with.
Well, with that in mind, and circling to the Zukaz launch, the APIs that we can then put in, that will not be a great issue for you to have ready in the Zukaz app as well for coins to be part of that.
That's a simple piece. That's the kind of the last piece. And the way that we've built the actual demo app that you have like on the website and the browser actually uses the same API we're writing documentation for. So it's actually we're already testing that process concurrently while we're getting ready for UL's audit. So it's we're doubling up again to kind of save time there.
So on one hand, I think for everybody, it's good news that whilst there is this timeline that we're working towards on the coins, on the other hand, it fits in well with where you all want to see us with the Zukaz app and bringing that together. And I think it's important because we've obviously got people, not only can they trade, but they can also buy and sell goods and services. With what you're saying, how easy it is for merchants to hook in.
Yeah, you can literally attach it to any other kind of value you want to hook into.
And with the way you've designed that then, Robert, the coin or the app, does that allow other values to be attributed beyond what Zukaz is paying into the coins? Like, can other third parties add other sources of income or other sources of loyalty? Yeah,
you can integrate it really any way you want. You can attach any kind of loyalty. You can attach additional dividends, anything really, to anyone that holds a certain ID for a coin. So it's very, very flexible in terms of how you integrate it. Obviously, the core focus right now would just be getting it to Zukaz. But there's all kinds of stuff you can integrate it with.
So once these third-party open source guys get their hands on this, there'll be no stopping us. We can't control, the decentralisation and other values they can attribute to the Zucoins. That's beyond our control.
That will be beyond our control. Like I said, for a little while in the beginning, we'll have some training wheels so we can basically push out updates if there are any things that the community finds. But after that point, we can just switch that piece off and it will be completely just, disconnected from what we can control. I think it's wise to have a set of training wheels initially on the system that we can push updates out. And then after that, we can completely disconnect it and have just a completely autonomous, decentralized system. That we can't stop.
And in terms of quantifying the numbers, we've got 100 million fixed, that's the end of that. But you have made the decisions in discussions to expand the number of decimal points to give greater fraction ability. What are we taking that out to on the coin now?
Really, right now it's 8, but we can put it to 16. But that's completely tunable. So after we launch, we can always adjust that for a little while afterwards while we push updates out. But there'll come a time where we won't need really anything else. And then we can just lock it in that. And once we disconnect the ability to update stuff from our end, it'll just be whatever we set it to, and that will be it. It will be final.
So if you thought about some promoters out there saying that Bitcoin might claw its way back to 20,000, 50,000 US dollars a coin. There's even those that are suggesting in the longer term 100,000. There's a couple of roadblocks there, isn't there? You've got the roadblocks of the miners running out of incentive.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of problems with the Lightning Network right now Bitcoin's got. It's being used mostly for small transactions because there's a few ways you can work around like big values, so it's really not reliable for big transactions yet. But yeah, really, it's not going to be. They've got a lot of problems to fix before get to the point.
And does that include, Robert, issues where you want to buy a cup of coffee with a Bitcoin and you're stuck with a 3-hour delay waiting for something to happen? Or
well, yeah, the problem is though, if Bitcoin value keeps changing, you wouldn't really want to buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin because it'd be worth more to keep it.
Plus, there's nothing of any underlying strength in the coin either, is there?
No,
that's just it.
Yeah. The way the bundle Lightning transactions is, it needs a bit of more work.
So whilst we talk some big blue sky, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of volumes and numbers, there's nothing in your mind as the genius, the guru behind this, that says that 1 billion people can't have a fraction of a Zucoin?
No, because the scale is in parallel. It doesn't scale in series. So there's no one like pipe that everything has to go through. There's no like one mining pool that everything has to go through. You can have things running at the same time, irrespective of what somebody else is transacting.
And that goes to the same with the marketing, with the UL brand behind it.
Yeah.
Obviously, merchants readily accepting it as good as a MasterCard or Visa.
Yeah. So one of the focus is to make it as easy as possible for third-party developers to integrate it. That's like a big chunk of what our time has been in the last few weeks, to make it as easy as possible to integrate this thing into third-party systems. And we're even looking at like WordPress plugins. Like you could just hook in WordPress websites. There's more than a third of the internet now runs a WordPress website, of the websites out there. So you could just literally upload a plugin that will just hook you onto the network, and you can start being involved in the network. It's very simple. It's very simple to start being involved.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to sort of wind it up there, Robert. I think the last question for me is that in my earlier discussions with some of the team members at UL, and I've only been dealing at the corporate level, so you're at the coalface with the IT. Have they been, what sort of words, surprised with that this is still unbelievable that it can happen? There was doubt initially that you can change the whole dynamic.
Not so much with UL. UL's been pretty much, they've been on our side for most of the time. They've really just wanted to work with the technical side of it. Yep. It's probably some other parties that have been involved, come and gone and sort of stuff that have been more unusual in terms of how they've kind of supported us, I guess is the right word to use. But I mean, it's all good. It's all criticism that we need. Yeah. Because it's going to get analyzed like crazy once it's launched. So we have to kind of get as much feedback from as many different sides as possible.
Yeah, fantastic.
So yeah.
Very good. Well, I'll leave it at that, Zucoin holders. Bear with us. The anxiety continues as we wait. We're all in great expectations. We've got Robert on side to get us through where we're at, UL as well. Stay with it. It's not long to go now. And for those that were early adopters of the Zucoins, it's a fantastic outcome for you in the long term, and fantastic to be on board at the prices that you've achieved, because that won't stay at those levels in the immediate near future. So, Robert, we'll do this again. Yep. And thanks for doing it. I know you've risked putting yourself on global TV, but this is the real gentleman, and fantastic to have him. Cheers.
No worries. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, mate.